It started with a simple envelope, innocuous and unassuming, sitting on a polished mahogany table in a private wing of a London residence few knew existed. But inside that envelope lay a secret, a revelation that would not just shake Prince Harry to his core. It had the potential to rock the entire royal family and send shockwaves across the world. Imagine for a moment the shock of discovering that someone you trusted implicitly, the person you built your life around, harbored a truth so explosive that it could rewrite your entire perception of love, loyalty, and family. That moment, frozen in time, would become the beginning of a scandal no one could have predicted. And yet, this was not fiction. This was the very real chain of events that began to unfold the day DNA results arrived, revealing a truth that Harry could not unsee. Meghan Markle had a secret connection, a secret love, and a secret child. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world had been watching Harry and Meghan for years. From their fairy tale wedding at St. George's Chapel to the carefully curated media appearances and staged public displays of affection, the couple seemed untouchable, flawless, almost untarnishable. Every smile, every handshake, every photo was scrutinized, dissected, and shared across the globe. Yet behind those pristine public images, cracks had been forming. Subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable once you knew where to look. The gossip columns hinted, the paparazzi caught fleeting glances, and palace insiders whispered in hushed tones. Rumors of tension, disagreements, and secrets had always existed, but nothing anyone had seen before prepared them for this. The DNA results were meant to be confidential, a private matter handled discreetly. Harry had expected, perhaps naively, that these tests were routine, perhaps linked to medical health checks or genealogical curiosity. Instead, the results arrived like a thunderclap. The numbers and letters on the page revealed something unthinkable. Meghan Markle had a connection with another man, a connection that went beyond simple acquaintance, one that had produced a child. Harry's world, meticulously ordered and controlled, began to unravel. The initial reaction, as sources would later describe, was disbelief, followed by fury, followed by a kind of grief that is difficult to articulate. Grief not just for the betrayal itself, but for the loss of trust, the shattering of an image that had been carefully cultivated over years. Think about it for a second. You build a life with someone, you invest your heart, your energy, your very public persona into a shared story. And then you discover, through a sterile, clinical report of genetic markers and relationships, that there is an entire facet of that life hidden from you. How do you process something like that in the public eye, under the gaze of the world, with cameras and microphones ready to capture every twitch, every tear, every whispered reaction? For Harry, this was not just a private heartbreak. It became an urgent, impossible balancing act between personal anguish and the relentless glare of media scrutiny. Every step, every reaction had consequences, not just for his relationship with Meghan, but for his family, his legacy, and the narrative that millions had come to believe. Insiders say that the first few hours after the revelation were chaotic. Calls were made, trusted aides summoned, lawyers alerted. But the information could not be contained. The whispers began to leak, as they always do in institutions as large and intricate as the monarchy. And once a secret like this starts to move, it moves faster than anyone can control. Imagine Harry pacing a quiet room, the walls closing in, feeling the weight of a life suddenly transformed. The emotions were raw, unfiltered. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, confusion, grief, all coursing through him in rapid succession. And yet, there was also a kind of shock-induced clarity. Decisions had to be made, moves had to be calculated, and the world outside, hungry for scandal, was waiting for him to act. What makes this story so compelling, so irresistible to the public, is not just the betrayal or the hidden child. It is the layers of secrecy, manipulation, and potential deception that weave through the narrative. The palace, the media, friends and allies, even Meghan herself. All were now players in a drama whose stakes were incalculable. Questions abound. How long had this been hidden? Who knew? What were the intentions? How could a child exist in the shadows, completely unknown to Harry? the man who publicly swore to love and protect his family above all else. And most importantly, how would the prince react once he fully comprehended the implications, not just for his personal life, but for his standing in the family, the monarchy, and the eyes of the world? Consider the psychological toll. Harry has spent his life in the public sphere, navigating a family legacy fraught with expectation, scrutiny, and relentless media pressure. This revelation was not merely personal. It struck at the very core of his identity. It forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, loyalty, and the consequences of public life. And the emotional spikes were intense. Anger at Meghan for the secret, fear of public exposure, sadness for the child involved, frustration at the palace for failing to prevent such a scenario, and a gnawing sense of betrayal that cuts deeper because it comes from someone you believed was your partner, your confidant, your rock. But what does it mean for the audience? Why should anyone care about this particular royal scandal when millions of stories of betrayal and secrets exist around the world? Because this story transcends ordinary drama. It involves one of the most scrutinized families on the planet, whose every move is amplified 1,000-fold by media outlets and social platforms. It is a narrative about power, trust, secrecy, and human emotion, elements that resonate universally. And the added layer of a hidden child introduces stakes that are both deeply personal and institutionally significant, raising questions about inheritance, lineage, and the very image of the monarchy. Even before the public knew, there were signs that something was off. Observers noticed subtle shifts in behavior, fleeting moments of tension caught on camera, cryptic social media posts, and hushed rumors filtering through the tabloid networks. None of it made sense until now, until the DNA results illuminated a secret that had long been buried. The pattern was there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone like Harry to uncover it. And uncover it he did, propelling the story into motion, sparking reactions that range from the intensely private to the explosively public. As we set the stage for what comes next, it's crucial to ask yourself, how would you respond if you were in Harry's position? How do you reconcile love, trust, betrayal, and family under a microscope the world never turns off? Every decision Harry would make in the following days would be fraught with consequence, each one capable of altering the course of his life, Meghan's life, and the broader narrative of the royal family. The tension is palpable, the stakes immense, and the secrets deeper than anyone could have imagined. And just when you think the storm cannot get worse, it does. Because the DNA results are not just numbers on a page. They are a doorway to a cascade of revelations, each more shocking than the last. There are whispers of meetings and communications that were deliberately kept from Harry, of friends and confidants who may have had their own agendas, and of a child whose existence challenges the very foundation of what he thought he knew about love, family, and loyalty. The palace is on high alert, the media is circling, and Harry's next move could ignite a global conversation with consequences far beyond his personal heartbreak. So, as we begin this story, we ask the audience to step into the shoes of a prince whose life has been meticulously documented, who has been watched his entire life, and who now faces a revelation that no training, no preparation, and no royal protocol could have readied him for. This is a story about betrayal, secrecy, love, and scandal on a scale that only the modern royal family could generate. The intrigue is just beginning. The emotional stakes are astronomical, and the fallout will be felt far and wide. And just as the first pages of the DNA report were read, and Harry's world started to tilt, one truth became undeniable. Nothing would ever be the same again. The secrets that Meghan had kept, the child that had been hidden, and the reaction that was yet to come were only the beginning of a saga that would expose family fractures, ignite media frenzy, and challenge everything the world thought it knew about Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the royal family itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What was life like before everything unraveled? That's the question most people never get to ask themselves until it's far too late. For Prince Harry, the world outside looked perfect. The cameras caught smiles. The public witnessed charm. The tabloids printed carefully framed images of him and Meghan walking hand in hand, attending charity events, and posing for photographs with their children. A picture-perfect life. But behind closed doors, the calm was deceptive. Every palace hallway, every quiet room, every whispered conversation carried hints, shadows of tension that nobody outside the royal inner circle could ever see. The calm before the storm is always the most dangerous, because you never know a hurricane is coming until the first crack of lightning hits. Harry's days had always been regimented, a mixture of public duty and private reflection. Mornings spent with his children, afternoons devoted to charity work, evenings filled with security briefings, meetings with advisors, and quiet moments with Meghan. But in that quiet, a subtle unease had begun to creep in. Friends noticed at first, the slight furrow of his brow, the restless pacing, the way he would check his phone compulsively, scanning for messages he didn't expect but feared to receive. Even Meghan, whose public persona projected confidence and control, seemed more calculated in her movements, more aware of the world's gaze. A life under scrutiny leaves little room for true privacy. And yet, nothing prepared Harry for the revelation that would come. In those months before the DNA results, the palace atmosphere had grown taut, a mix of anticipation and subtle suspicion. Advisors whispered to one another behind closed doors, discussing minor scandals, rumors, and gossip that could hint at larger truths. Meetings would run long, ostensibly about charity work or public appearances, but insiders claimed that every discussion carried a tension that was palpable to those present. Harry, though often seen as the emotional heart of the royal family, had begun to isolate himself, seeking solace in the few people he trusted implicitly. But trust, as he would soon learn, can be fragile. Do you remember the first time you realized that someone you trusted could betray you? That gut-wrenching sensation of disbelief, followed by anger, confusion, and fear? That's exactly where Harry was unknowingly heading. Every smile he gave at a public event, every carefully phrased interview, was a mask, not just for the public, but for himself. It's easier to maintain a facade when you don't yet know the depth of the betrayal waiting in the wings. At this stage, Harry's interactions with Meghan were cordial, even loving by public standards. They laughed in private, shared meals with their children, and attended events together. But beneath the surface, subtle cracks began to show. In private, conversations could turn tense without warning. Insiders hint at moments when Harry asked questions that Meghan dodged, small inquiries about past acquaintances or unexplained absences. She would deflect with charm, redirecting conversations to lighter topics, leaving Harry with a gnawing sense of uncertainty he couldn't quite name. Imagine the tension of suspecting something monumental, yet lacking proof, like feeling a storm approaching without seeing a single dark cloud. Meanwhile, palace staff noticed changes too. The normally disciplined and serene corridors of royal life grew quieter, filled with hushed tones and glances exchanged between aides. The sense that something unseen was brewing was impossible to ignore. Security reports hinted at unusual activity, discreet phone calls, late-night meetings, and whispered conversations outside of official channels. No one spoke openly, but the air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a hurricane that everyone knows is coming but no one dares to confront. Harry's routine, once a source of comfort, became a cage. His morning jogs through Kensington Gardens felt less like exercise and more like meditation under surveillance. Every interaction with staff or media carried potential risk. He was aware that secrets, once revealed, could not be unrevealed. And in that delicate balance of expectation and secrecy, every minor annoyance, every unexplained event seemed magnified. A cracked photo frame becomes a portent, a mislaid note becomes a clue, a glance exchanged in a hallway becomes a sign of conspiracy. Do you ever think about the weight of legacy? For Harry, the weight of the royal family, his lineage, and the history of his ancestors was immense. He carried it lightly in public, with charm and humor, but in private, it pressed down on him. The family he loved and the institution he served demanded perfection, while his own emotions pulled him toward chaos. That tension, that push and pull between duty and personal truth, became the backdrop of his life, until the DNA results arrived and shattered the illusion entirely. It wasn't just Meghan's secret that loomed over him. It was the anticipation of what secrets she might be hiding. The child revealed by the DNA was the first, but what about other hidden truths? Was there more lying beneath the surface? Friends close to the couple describe Harry as having moments of quiet paranoia, pacing rooms late at night, reading documents, and rereading messages. He was trying to piece together a puzzle that he didn't even know existed in full. The tension of uncertainty is something most of us rarely experience at that scale. The stakes are life-altering, reputation-altering, and legacy-altering. The calm before the storm is deceptive because it lulls you into a false sense of security. Harry's life, meticulously documented and intensely scrutinized, had felt stable, predictable even. But stability is fragile. All it takes is one revelation to bring an entire system crashing down. That envelope, the DNA results, and the confirmation of Meghan's secret child were the proverbial spark to dry kindling. The first step had been taken, but no one, not even Harry, could have predicted the magnitude of what would follow. And yet, during those weeks leading up to the revelation, life continued outwardly as normal. Public appearances, charity work, family moments, all continued on the surface. The world remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing behind closed doors. But Harry sensed it. That uneasy tension, the small moments of doubt and anxiety, the glances and half-smiles that carried more meaning than anyone outside the palace could guess. They all signaled that the calm would not last. The quiet before the storm is always pregnant with danger, and the air was thick with it. Questions began forming in Harry's mind, questions he didn't yet dare to voice. Why did certain messages from Meghan go unanswered? Why were certain events in her past glossed over? Who else knew? Could this really be happening? And the most terrifying question of all, what would he do when he finally saw the proof? Because seeing is believing, and Harry knew that once the truth was laid bare, there would be no turning back. The calm of the months before the DNA test had created a false reality, one that could no longer exist in the light of truth. Friends later recalled the night before the envelope arrived. Harry had gone for a late-night drive alone, the streets of London empty, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. He had called no one. He spoke to no one. He simply drove, thinking, imagining, trying to prepare himself for something he could not yet know. That drive, a small, intimate moment of introspection, would later be remembered as the last fragment of the calm before all hell broke loose. The storm was coming, and when it would hit harder than anyone could anticipate. And just as the city slept, oblivious to the coming scandal, a courier delivered a package to Harry's residence. Inside was the DNA report, sealed in an envelope that seemed ordinary, yet carried secrets that would explode into one of the most sensational revelations of the decade. The calm, the carefully maintained facade, the appearance of a perfect life, it all ended in an instant. The first numbers and results on the page would send Harry reeling, setting in motion events that would tear through trust, loyalty, and family bonds. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the truth hits harder than any rumor, speculation, or gut feeling could ever prepare you for? For Prince Harry, that moment arrived with the arrival of a small, unassuming envelope that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. The DNA results inside were meant to clarify, to confirm, perhaps to put to rest lingering questions. Instead, they ignited a chain reaction so volatile, so emotionally charged, that the calm Harry had clung to was obliterated in an instant. The first line of the report might have looked clinical, sterile even, a series of numbers, letters, and technical jargon, but it carried a secret that no formula or statistical probability could have predicted: Meghan Markle's connection to another man, a connection that had produced a child. The shock cannot be understated. Imagine holding in your hands something you trust will reassure you, only to realize it confirms the unthinkable. Harry reportedly froze at the first glance, staring at the page as if the letters themselves were mocking him. Friends and aides describe him as pale, silent, gripping the envelope as though it were both a lifeline and a grenade at the same time. The mind struggles to comprehend what the eyes have just confirmed. Betrayal, deception, a hidden life, a child that existed entirely outside the realm of his awareness. The very pillars of trust he had built his relationship on were shaken to their foundations. And yet, the reaction was not instant rage, not at first. It began with disbelief, denial. Harry, like anyone else, searched for errors. Was it a mix-up? A mistake? Could the lab have been wrong? The idea that Meghan, someone he had devoted his life to, could have harbored such a secret felt absurd, almost surreal. Every memory, every shared moment, was suddenly reframed through a lens of suspicion. The private dinners, the quiet conversations, even the laughter of their children, all of it now carried an undercurrent of uncertainty, a subtle question mark hovering over everything he had taken for granted. The initial hours after seeing the report were chaotic. Sources claim Harry barricaded himself in a private study, refusing to speak to anyone. Phone calls went unanswered. Advisors knocked, were ignored. His closest friends described the scene as tense, almost cinematic, like watching a figure in a storm of his own making, trapped by emotion and circumstance. The isolation, self-imposed, was both protective and destructive. Harry needed time to process, to reconcile the love he felt with the betrayal the evidence revealed. But the public, as always, was unaware. The palace staff kept the situation under wraps, yet the tension was palpable, like electricity in the air before a lightning strike. Do you ever wonder how someone reacts when the people they trust most turn out to be the source of the deepest shock? Harry's emotions were a storm in themselves. Anger, confusion, grief, and disbelief collided violently. Friends recount moments where he would pace, slam doors, whisper questions to no one, or stare blankly at walls as if expecting answers to materialize from the plaster. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. How could the woman he loved, trusted, and had built a life around maintain a secret of this magnitude? And yet, there it was, verified, undeniable, and devastating. The details of the report were explicit, not in a crude way, but in a factual, unassailable manner. The genetic markers confirmed paternity, linking Meghan's secret child to another man, whose identity was hinted at in subtle footnotes and corroborated by ancillary evidence only available to those handling the test. Harry's mind raced through a timeline, piecing together the years of their relationship, the interactions that might have hinted at this secret, the absence of transparency. Every memory was dissected, every smile and conversation reevaluated. What had seemed innocent, benign, or private was suddenly charged with hidden meaning. And the child, the revelation of a child, was perhaps the most destabilizing element. Not just the existence of another life connected to Meghan, but the implications of that child on family, inheritance, public perception, and the legacy of Harry himself. Friends of the couple suggest that Harry's initial thoughts were a mix of protectiveness, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. How could a child exist, fully real and alive, without his knowledge? And what did it mean for the children he had with Meghan? For his position in the family? For the image of loyalty and transparency he had tried so hard to maintain? Questions piled up faster than answers could arrive. Who else knew? How long had Meghan kept this hidden? What about advisors, palace officials, and family members? Was this child's existence known to anyone in the royal circle, or had it been a secret even from the people tasked with guiding and advising Harry? The mind reels trying to reconcile the private and the public. In the royal world, where secrecy and image management are part of daily life, the idea that such a monumental truth could be concealed is shocking, yet believable. By the time the night fell, Harry was no longer simply processing. He was strategizing. Friends describe him sitting with legal advisors, reviewing documents, considering options, and weighing reactions. Could the palace handle this discreetly? Should it be exposed to the media immediately? How could he confront Meghan? Each choice carried explosive consequences. One wrong move, and the story would not remain private. One misstep, and the family, his children, and even the monarchy itself could be caught in the fallout. The weight of that responsibility was immense. Meanwhile, the psychological toll was mounting. Insiders note that Harry displayed signs of extreme emotional strain, sleepless nights, moments of intense silence, bursts of anger followed by tears, and an inability to eat or focus. His body reacted to the stress as his mind wrestled with the impossible truth. It is one thing to suspect deception, another to have it confirmed scientifically, in a way that cannot be questioned, debated, or ignored. The human response is visceral, raw, and uncontrollable. And for Harry, whose life has always been under public scrutiny, there was no private refuge. No one could fully witness, understand, or protect him from the storm that had just been unleashed. The next morning, the world outside remained unchanged, blissfully unaware. Cameras continued to capture the royal routine, tabloids speculated about minor events, social media debated fashion choices and charity initiatives. Yet behind the palace walls, a different story was unfolding. Harry had begun to confront Meghan, not yet publicly, but in private, demanding explanations, clarity, and truth. What he encountered was not denial, but a mixture of deflection, partial truths, and emotional appeals. Friends describe it as a delicate balancing act. Meghan trying to maintain composure, protect her image, and control the narrative, while Harry alternated between explosive anger and a quieter, more calculating approach. What made this moment truly surreal was the intersection of private agony and public expectation. Harry was not just a husband grappling with betrayal. He was a prince whose every move is documented, analyzed, and criticized. Any emotional display could be misinterpreted, sensationalized, or weaponized against him. Yet the personal stakes could not be ignored. Here was a man forced to navigate heartbreak and scandal simultaneously, under the relentless pressure of an entire nation and media landscape. Can you imagine facing the ultimate betrayal while knowing the world is waiting for you to react, to break, to falter? And the child, still unspoken in public but known to Harry, loomed over every decision. The implications were endless. Custody? Financial responsibility? Public perception? Could he ever reconcile this revelation with the children he already had, the life he had built, the family legacy he had vowed to uphold? Every scenario played out in his mind, each one more complicated and fraught than the last. The DNA results were not just numbers on paper. They were a key unlocking a Pandora's box of scandal, emotional turmoil, and strategic decisions with consequences that would ripple far beyond his personal life. By mid-morning, whispers had started to emerge. Insiders reported that palace aides noticed tension, staff felt unease, and those closest to the couple sensed a dramatic shift. Harry was no longer simply absorbing the revelation. He was acting. Calls were made to trusted confidants, meetings scheduled with advisors, and strategies discussed to manage the fallout. Every step had to be calculated. Every interaction had to be precise. The reality was unavoidable. Once the DNA results were known, nothing could return to the status quo. And then came the first leak. Not public, not to the press, but among insiders. The mere suggestion that there was a secret child sent a ripple of shock through the palace corridors. Friends describe a sense of panic mingled with disbelief, as officials realized the potential magnitude of what Harry now knew. If the information ever reached the public prematurely, the scandal would be catastrophic, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the entire royal institution. The tension was tangible, like static before a lightning storm, each charged interaction amplifying the sense of impending chaos. And just as Harry began to plan his next move, just as he began to formulate how to confront Meghan, to verify the timeline, and to understand the full scope of what had been hidden, a thought struck him with icy clarity. What if this was only the beginning? What if the child was not the only secret, not the only deception, not the only truth waiting to emerge? The DNA results were a spark. The fire had just begun. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered how well you really know someone? How even those closest to you can harbor secrets so monumental, so life-altering, that discovering them feels like stepping into a parallel universe. For Prince Harry, the revelation of Meghan's secret child was only the first tremor in a much larger earthquake. The DNA results confirmed what no one wanted to believe. But they also opened the door to questions about Meghan's past, the timelines she'd carefully obscured, and the connections she had kept hidden from the world. What emerged next was a portrait of a life that had been meticulously curated, controlled, and, in some ways, concealed from even the most intimate circles. To understand the gravity, we must start with Meghan's past. The chapters of her life before she became a duchess, before the cameras followed her every move, before Harry and the world believed they knew her. Hollywood insiders, old colleagues, and acquaintances painted a picture of ambition, charm, and determination, but they also hinted at a complexity few could see. There were fleeting relationships, private trips, business dealings, and social connections that were rarely mentioned in the public narrative. And among them, according to sources who spoke with royal confidence, was a figure whose significance had remained hidden until the DNA results brought it into focus. The timeline is critical. Harry and Meghan's courtship was, at least publicly, a whirlwind of fairy tale moments, red carpet appearances, and rapidly escalating media coverage. But beneath that, Meghan's life intersected with another man in ways that were intentionally obscured. The details, pieced together through the DNA evidence, private records, and corroborating witness accounts, reveal encounters that were intimate, ongoing, and ultimately consequential. The child revealed by the genetic test was not a one-time anomaly. It was the tangible proof of a life Harry had never imagined. Imagine discovering that someone you've pledged yourself to had been living parallel chapters of intimacy, secrecy, and hidden responsibility. The shock is profound. Friends of Harry describe his initial reactions as an emotional pendulum swinging wildly from disbelief to rage, to heartbreak, to an almost obsessive need to understand every detail. He began asking questions that had been taboo before. Where had Meghan been during specific trips? Why were certain social connections never mentioned? What about the people she interacted with privately before their relationship? Each answer, or non-answer, fueled a storm of doubt, compounding the betrayal revealed by the DNA. And with each new piece of information, Harry found himself navigating an intricate maze of emotion, loyalty, and strategy. But Meghan's secret life was not merely about hidden relationships. It was a complex web of connections, ambitions, and public appearances that had been carefully managed. Insider accounts suggest that she had cultivated relationships with influential figures, not only in entertainment, but also in media and business circles, in ways that bolstered her image while concealing personal matters. Her charm and public poise were real, but they were also tools, instruments in a game of perception that few fully understood. The child revealed by the DNA results was the most explosive element, but the backdrop of secrecy and intention was equally compelling. And yet, there were contradictions. Publicly, Meghan projected transparency, warmth, and commitment. Privately, sources indicate there were moments of calculation, subtle omissions, and deliberate deflections. It was a life of duality, where the person the world believed they knew was only a part of the whole. Harry had always known her as confident, intelligent, and passionate, but never as someone who could hide such monumental truths. That realization struck him like a physical blow. How could someone so close, so trusted, maintain a secret life so intricate and consequential without detection? Do you ever consider how secrecy operates in high-stakes environments? In Meghan's world, secrecy was not just personal, it was structural. Every trip, every phone call, every social engagement was filtered, observed, and, in some cases, choreographed to maintain appearances. Yet, human connections are messy. Relationships leave traces. Messages, photographs, witnesses, and ultimately DNA. No matter how carefully a life is curated, traces remain. And in Meghan's case, the traces culminated in a revelation that even the most sophisticated management could not contain. The child was only the beginning. As Harry dug deeper, assisted by trusted advisors and confidential sources, other facets of Meghan's secret life emerged. Conversations she had with close friends, cryptic references in emails and messages, and accounts from colleagues suggested a series of interactions and events that had been deliberately obscured. Each new discovery layered additional complexity on top of the initial shock. Harry had to navigate not only the emotional weight of betrayal, but also the strategic implications. What could be disclosed publicly? How could damage to the family's reputation be mitigated? How could he protect his children while grappling with a hidden child that complicated everything? And then there were the whispers, rumors circulating quietly in media circles, palace staff, and close associates. They hinted at meetings, correspondence, and connections that had remained invisible until now. Some of these whispers suggested that Meghan had been aware of the potential consequences for Harry and had taken steps to manage exposure, perhaps anticipating that the DNA would one day be revealed. Others painted a picture of calculated risk, a delicate balance between personal desire and public persona. The more Harry learned, the more he realized the depth and breadth of secrecy that had defined this part of Meghan's life. Harry's emotional state during this time was described by sources as intense, almost unrelenting. Insomnia, pacing, bursts of quiet fury, and sudden moments of reflection characterized his days. He was trying to reconcile the person he thought he knew with the reality of someone who had led a parallel life. Trust, once a given, had to be reevaluated. Every interaction with Meghan was filtered through the lens of the DNA results and the accompanying revelations. Every conversation carried the potential for new disclosures or hidden truths. And as he began confronting her privately, the conversations were tense, layered with emotion, partial admissions, and deflections. Each word, each pause, was analyzed, creating a tense psychological chess match that few outside the palace could imagine. And what about the child? The revelation was as much about the existence of life as it was about responsibility. Harry had to grapple with not only emotional betrayal, but also the implications of a child he had never known existed. Questions of paternity, involvement, privacy, and potential public disclosure became urgent. The stakes were no longer merely relational. They were logistical, legal, and public. How could this child be acknowledged without igniting a media firestorm? What were Meghan's intentions regarding disclosure? And, most importantly, how would this revelation affect the children Harry had with Meghan and the delicate dynamics of their blended family? The contrast between Meghan's public persona and private reality created an almost cinematic tension. On camera, she continued to appear confident, composed, and supportive. Behind closed doors, however, there were accounts of anxiety, stress, and careful maneuvering. Sources describe moments where Meghan appeared both apologetic and strategic, navigating the complex fallout while protecting her image. This duality added layers to Harry's challenge. He was confronting both the human betrayal and the calculated management of perception, a combination that intensified the emotional stakes. What makes this chapter of the story so gripping is not just the betrayal itself, but the complexity of the hidden life behind it. Every revelation led to new questions, each answer leading to further inquiry. Friends and aides described Harry as relentless, driven not by vengeance, but by the need for understanding, clarity, and closure. The DNA results were the catalyst, but the unraveling of Meghan's secret life became a sprawling investigation into trust, intention, and the consequences of concealed truths. And just as Harry began to piece together the hidden chapters of Meghan's life, to understand the people, places, and moments that had been deliberately obscured, one undeniable truth emerged. The DNA child was only the surface. Beneath it lay a network of secrets, connections, and calculated omissions that had been invisible until now. The calm of their relationship, the life they had publicly presented, and the trust he had placed in her were all illusions built on carefully curated fragments of reality. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How do you process betrayal when it hits so close, so personally, that the ground beneath your feet seems to vanish? For Prince Harry, the DNA revelation and the unraveling of Meghan's secret life were not abstract shocks. They were visceral, immediate, and suffocating. The calm he had clung to, the life he thought he knew, shattered in a single, irrevocable moment. Every instinct screamed disbelief. Every fiber of his being wrestled with anger, grief, and confusion. But the world expected him to remain composed, to navigate heartbreak under relentless public scrutiny, and to make decisions that could reverberate across the monarchy. The weight was unbearable. The first hours after fully confronting Meghan privately were described by insiders as chaotic. Harry reportedly locked himself in a secure study, pacing relentlessly, phone in hand, reviewing documents, emails, and notes in a desperate attempt to piece together the full timeline of deception. His aides observed a mix of intense silence punctuated by sudden, explosive outbursts, doors slamming, muttered questions, and abrupt movements as though the walls themselves were suffocating him. Imagine the psychological strain, knowing your entire life's foundation is built on a lie, and that lie has tangible proof in the form of DNA. It's a cocktail of betrayal, disbelief, and anger unlike anything most of us could ever imagine. Every memory Harry held of his relationship with Meghan came under scrutiny. Private dinners, quiet conversations, family moments, even laughter, they were filtered now through the lens of suspicion. What had been innocent moments of connection now appeared tainted, or at least incomplete. Every interaction with Meghan was analyzed repeatedly, searching for hints he might have missed, for clues that could explain the secrecy. Did he miss the signs? Did he ignore subtle warnings? The mind searches for answers in chaos, and for Harry, there were none that provided comfort. And yet, the complexity went beyond emotional devastation. There was the public dimension, the world watching, the cameras waiting, the media poised to seize any hint of scandal. Harry knew that an emotional outburst could become fodder for tabloids, social media speculation, and even political commentary. But the private pain, the betrayal, and the revelation of a child he had never known existed demanded a response. He could not pretend. He could not ignore it. Every decision was a tightrope walk between personal reaction and public consequence. Insiders describe Harry's state as almost obsessive. He would revisit the timeline again and again, checking dates, locations, social interactions, and communications. Each piece of information was dissected to understand the depth of Meghan's secret life. Friends recount nights when he could not sleep, staring at ceilings, muttering questions under his breath, or walking alone in the palace gardens, trying to make sense of the impossible. There was rage, yes, but also sorrow, confusion, and the profound sense that a world he had known completely had transformed overnight into something unrecognizable. The confrontation with Meghan, when it finally occurred, was tense, layered, and emotionally charged. According to insiders, the discussions were not only about the child revealed by the DNA, but also about hidden relationships, omitted truths, and the emotional impact of decades-long secrecy. Meghan reportedly responded with a mixture of deflection, partial admissions, and strategic reasoning, trying to protect her narrative while acknowledging fragments of the truth. For Harry, the emotional roller coaster of hope, despair, anger, and disbelief left him struggling to find footing. And then there was the child, the existence of another life connected to Meghan. The implications were overwhelming. Questions of responsibility, privacy, and public exposure loomed large. Could the child be acknowledged without sparking a global scandal? Would this revelation affect Harry's own children? How would the family, the monarchy, and the media respond? Each question compounded the emotional intensity, creating a situation that was both profoundly personal and inescapably public. What made Harry's breaking point particularly intense was the intersection of personal betrayal and institutional pressure. Unlike ordinary relationships, this was not a private issue. It intersected with legacy, public image, and the expectations of the royal family. The DNA revelation was not just about infidelity or secrecy. It challenged the trust, loyalty, and emotional bonds that underpin both marriage and monarchy. The stakes were monumental. Harry was not merely grappling with heartbreak. He was confronting a potential crisis that could ripple across generations. The psychological toll manifested in extreme stress responses, sleepless nights, emotional volatility, moments of isolation, and bursts of uncharacteristic assertiveness. Friends recall instances where Harry would abruptly leave rooms, take private calls in secret locations, or spend hours locked away with advisors. There was a constant back and forth between emotion and strategy, acting impulsively in private while calculating every possible public repercussion. It was a delicate balance, and the pressure threatened to consume him entirely. And then the palace became aware of his state. Advisors and security personnel reportedly approached him carefully, aware that the emotional intensity could lead to unpredictable actions. Every conversation became a negotiation between honesty and discretion, between private emotion and public obligation. It was clear that Harry's breaking point was approaching, not in an explosive public display, but in a quiet, relentless internal storm that made every decision a question of control, judgment, and survival. In the midst of this, Harry began to consider the broader implications. The palace itself, the family dynamics, and even his own public image were at risk. The revelation of Meghan's secret child could not remain private for long. The truth had a way of leaking, especially when the emotions surrounding it were as volatile as his. Friends describe him as oscillating between a desire to protect Meghan, a need to shield his own children, and a drive to confront those who may have aided in hiding the truth. It was a psychological minefield, each step fraught with danger. And yet, amidst the chaos, Harry found clarity in one thing. He could not ignore the truth. The DNA results, Meghan's concealed relationships, and the existence of a child demanded acknowledgement, confrontation, and decision-making. Friends describe long hours of reflection, consulting advisors, and even moments of private counseling to navigate the emotional and strategic complexity of the situation. The breaking point was not an instantaneous explosion. It was the accumulation of shock, betrayal, and responsibility, building relentlessly until action was unavoidable. The tipping point came quietly. According to insider accounts, Harry reached a moment where reflection gave way to action. He began to plan, to confront, to understand, and to strategize how to manage not only the emotional fallout, but also the logistical and public consequences. Every word, every decision, every next step had to be measured with precision, because at this scale, mistakes would be magnified. The stakes were no longer personal. They were systemic, involving the monarchy, public perception, and the delicate balance of private and public truth. And as Harry stood at the precipice of decision, facing the reality of Meghan's secret life, the DNA-confirmed child, and the implications for family and legacy, he realized something undeniable. The breaking point was not a moment of weakness. It was a moment of reckoning. Every secret, every omission, every hidden truth had collided in a way that could no longer be ignored. Harry's next moves would define not only his personal life, but also the trajectory of one of the most scrutinized families in the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if everything you believed about a family, about love, and about loyalty suddenly shifted with a single revelation? For Prince Harry, the confirmation of Meghan's secret child was not just a shock. It was a seismic event that changed the contours of his personal world, the royal family dynamic, and the narrative the public had come to accept. The child was real, alive, hidden, and connected to Meghan in ways that had remained entirely invisible until the DNA results were revealed. The magnitude of the discovery cannot be overstated. This was not a rumor, not a fleeting suspicion, not a hypothetical scenario. This was tangible, undeniable, and irreversible. The initial moment of realization reportedly left Harry staggered. Friends describe a mix of disbelief and visceral emotion, anger, betrayal, protectiveness, and sorrow all colliding in an unrelenting storm. He held the evidence in his hands, staring at the results over and over, as if repetition might make the news less devastating. But it didn't. The numbers and confirmations on the page spoke louder than words. Meghan had a child, one he had never known existed, one whose life had been carefully shielded from him. Imagine the shock of realizing that the person you trusted implicitly has created a life entirely separate from your awareness, one that alters your conception of family, loyalty, and trust. The details were astonishing. According to insiders, the child was several years old, well cared for, and connected to Meghan in a deeply personal way. The existence of the child raised immediate questions. How had Meghan managed to hide this life? Who knew? What were the circumstances surrounding conception and birth? And perhaps most urgently, how should Harry respond? Friends describe him as oscillating between the desire to confront, to protect, and to understand. Each new piece of information added layers of emotional complexity and strategic consideration. Privacy, which had always been elusive for the royal family, became nearly impossible. Harry faced the challenge of processing his emotions while also considering the impact on public perception. The child could not be ignored, but any action, any disclosure, carried consequences that could ripple across the monarchy. Every decision had to account for the media, for family relations, and for the emotional well-being of all parties involved. The stakes were enormous, the pressure immense, and the emotional weight nearly unmanageable. Yet the most difficult aspect of the revelation was the emotional connection. The child represented not just a secret life, but also a tangible, living person whose existence was intertwined with betrayal, secrecy, and love. Harry had to grapple with feelings of protectiveness, anger, and even guilt. Could he embrace this child, acknowledge their existence publicly, or would that be too destabilizing? Could he reconcile this secret with the children he already had with Meghan? These were questions with no easy answers, each one capable of producing waves of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Insiders describe long hours where Harry would review the timeline, piece together information from advisors, and attempt to understand the sequence of events that had led to this revelation. Every phone call, every meeting, every moment of private conversation was scrutinized. How had this child been kept from him? How had Meghan orchestrated a life that remained hidden? And what did it mean for the trust and intimacy that he had assumed was foundational to their marriage? The cognitive and emotional load was staggering. At the same time, the palace was not unaware. Advisors and confidants recognized the magnitude of the situation and the potential for scandal. Security measures, communication strategies, and damage control plans were put into place even as Harry wrestled with his own emotions. The existence of a secret son had implications far beyond personal betrayal. It touched on lineage, inheritance, and the broader image of the monarchy. Every move was scrutinized, every decision had to be weighed carefully, and the pressure on Harry intensified. The emotional complexity was compounded by Meghan's role in managing the situation. According to sources, she responded with a mix of deflection, partial admissions, and strategic calm. Friends and aides described tense private conversations where Harry sought answers, demanded transparency, and tried to reconcile the public image of his marriage with the private reality of a hidden child. The dynamic was charged, a mixture of confrontation and negotiation, of anger and incredulity, of sorrow and disbelief. Each exchange brought new revelations and new layers of emotional intensity. And then there were the implications for the children Harry had with Meghan. How would this revelation affect their sense of security, trust, and family stability? Could they understand the existence of another sibling, one who had been hidden for years? The psychological and emotional dimensions of the secret child were staggering, not just for Harry, but for the entire family. Friends note that he was consumed with thoughts of how to navigate this revelation with sensitivity, compassion, and strategic foresight, even while grappling with his own emotional turmoil. The child's existence also forced Harry to confront broader societal and institutional implications. In the context of the royal family, lineage and inheritance are deeply significant. A child previously unknown could not only disrupt family dynamics, but also challenge public perceptions of legitimacy, trust, and transparency. Advisors reportedly discussed the delicate balance of privacy versus public awareness, the potential fallout in media coverage, and the long-term consequences for both Harry and Meghan. Every possible scenario was considered, analyzed, and debated, with emotional stakes running high. Friends recall moments when Harry would sit in private, speaking quietly, reflecting on how a child's life could be impacted by secrecy, media scrutiny, and family dynamics. The moral, emotional, and logistical complexity of the situation was overwhelming. He had to consider questions of responsibility, care, and acknowledgement, all while navigating the pressures of public expectation and family loyalty. The secret son was not just a revelation. It was a catalyst that demanded action, understanding, and strategic foresight. And yet, amidst all the chaos, there were flashes of clarity. Harry recognized that the child was innocent in all of this, a person whose life had been shaped by circumstances beyond their control. Despite the betrayal and secrecy, his protective instincts were immediate. He began to consider ways to approach the situation with empathy, understanding, and responsibility, even as he grappled with profound feelings of anger and hurt. This duality, between emotional reaction and strategic consideration, defined his response in the days that followed. The existence of the secret son also brought into sharp relief the layers of deception and secrecy surrounding Meghan's life. Friends and insiders describe long hours of reviewing interactions, tracing connections, and understanding the full scope of what had been hidden. Every revelation led to new questions, each answer pointing to additional complexities. The DNA results were the initial shock, but the broader narrative of hidden relationships, deliberate omissions, and private decision-making began to emerge, adding depth and gravity to Harry's emotional journey. And as Harry considered the child, the relationships, and the cascading implications of the revelation, he understood something critical. This was only the beginning. The DNA confirmation, the hidden son, and the unraveling of Meghan's secret life were the first pieces of a puzzle that would continue to reveal itself in unexpected ways. Every decision he made, every conversation he had, and every action taken to manage the fallout would shape not only his personal life, but also the trajectory of the royal family, public perception, and media scrutiny. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When secrets of this magnitude are revealed, the ripple effects are inevitable, unstoppable, and often devastating. For Prince Harry and the royal household, the revelation of Meghan's secret child wasn't just a private matter. It was a crisis with the potential to disrupt decades of protocol, tradition, and carefully maintained public perception. By the time the DNA results and the child's existence were fully understood, whispers had begun to circulate, staff were anxious, and the palace atmosphere became thick with tension, almost tangible in its intensity. The calm corridors that had once defined royal order now felt like a pressure cooker, each hallway and chamber echoing with anticipation and dread. The initial reaction among palace officials was described by insiders as immediate and instinctual: control the narrative. Damage control became the primary objective, even before Harry could fully process the emotional turmoil. Advisors, aides, and senior staff convened in private rooms, exchanging urgent, hushed conversations. How could this information be contained? How could the family prevent the story from leaking to the press? How could they manage Harry's response, knowing the media would seize on any sign of emotional volatility? Every option carried risks. Every plan had potential pitfalls. The palace had never faced a situation exactly like this, and its senior members felt the pressure acutely. Security protocols were immediately intensified. Staff movements were monitored more closely, communications were scrutinized, and access to sensitive information was restricted. According to insiders, Harry's personal security team was tasked not only with his physical safety, but also with controlling access to the details of the revelation. Messages and calls were filtered, meetings scheduled with extreme caution, and everyone involved was briefed on the potential for leaks. The stakes were enormous. One misstep, one inadvertent disclosure, and the private turmoil would erupt onto the global stage. At the same time, palace aides attempted to shield Harry from outside influence, while simultaneously preparing him for the inevitable confrontation with public knowledge. Friends describe a delicate dance. Advisors needed to respect his emotional state, protect him from excessive exposure, and simultaneously guide him toward actions that would mitigate fallout. It was a balancing act of unprecedented complexity. Every suggestion, every recommendation, was weighed against the possibility of intensifying the crisis, both emotionally and publicly. The palace's response was not only about containment, it was also about narrative control. In institutions like the monarchy, image is everything. The revelation of a secret child could not be allowed to spiral into unchecked scandal. Advisors considered options ranging from complete secrecy to carefully staged disclosures, each carrying its own dangers. How could they frame the narrative in a way that protected the family, addressed Harry's emotional reality, and preserved the dignity of the monarchy? Every word, every gesture, every public statement would be scrutinized by the press, social media, and international audiences. Meanwhile, Harry himself was under immense emotional pressure. He was expected to navigate his own grief, anger, and confusion, while also absorbing guidance from aides, advisors, and family members. Friends recall hours-long private meetings where he weighed responses, asked difficult questions, and struggled to reconcile the betrayal he felt with the need for measured action. The child, the secret life, and the broader implications were all present in every thought. The palace, despite its structure and hierarchy, could only offer guidance. The ultimate responsibility, emotionally and strategically, rested on him. And yet, containment proved elusive. Even within the palace, whispers began to circulate. Staff who were aware of the situation shared fragmented details with colleagues, creating a tension-filled atmosphere of speculation and anticipation. Rumors, once confined to private corridors, began to gain traction, and the possibility of media exposure loomed larger with every passing hour. The palace's control mechanisms, so effective in the past, were now being tested in a situation with personal, emotional, and logistical dimensions far beyond precedent. The internal chaos was mirrored by strategic deliberations. Advisors debated every potential move. How and when to address the revelation, how to manage public perception, and how to prevent long-term damage to the family's reputation. Legal considerations became paramount. Could Harry take legal action to protect privacy? Could the palace intervene in ways that might mitigate fallout without exacerbating emotional tension? Every step required foresight, precision, and careful judgment, knowing that even minor miscalculations could have catastrophic consequences. Adding complexity to the situation was Meghan's response. Sources indicate she was simultaneously navigating her own emotional turmoil and attempting to manage how information about the child was perceived. Friends describe her as both defensive and strategic, aware that her actions could influence the family, public opinion, and media coverage. The interplay between her calculated composure and Harry's raw emotional state created a tense, almost electric environment in private, while advisors attempted to keep both parties' actions aligned with broader strategic goals. As the palace attempted to maintain a semblance of calm externally, the internal reality was far from orderly. Meetings ran late into the night. Conversations were punctuated by frustration and uncertainty, and every decision carried weight. Staff were